So the first metric in the DCMA 14 point is logic. What does that mean? Well, you want to make sure that every task has a purpose. Logic allows your schedule to be dynamic. Logic is demonstrated by linking tasks together. Those links create predecessors and successors to tasks. Predecessors are all the events that happen prior to a task, and successors are all the events that happen after the task. You don't want dangling logic. That leaves a task just hanging there. What happens when a task is complete? You don't know. This metric looks to make sure that every task has a predecessor and successor.
So a recap of what the logic metric is it's making sure you have no dangling logic. Bottom line. Now, why is this important? Is because you want to have that complete network, because having that network demonstrates the logic in the schedule. It means everything has a purpose, it's related. You didn't just put tasks that didn't mean anything in your schedule. Like, every task has a purpose, it's related to another task in the project, and they all work together to complete your project. So without network logic, you can't perform a lot of drills and calculations, but your logic has to make sense. So in order to make sure that your schedule is a tool that your management or yourself can manage to, you have to have a network logic. So this one is making sure that you have logic in your schedule. What fields are used? You're going to be looking at your predecessor and successor fields. And how do you calculate this? Pretty simple. We'll walk through it. Is you count how many incomplete tasks have a missing predecessor or missing successor. And then you divide that by the count of how many incomplete tasks you have. So this is back to the baseline of you're not looking at completed tasks, you're narrowing it down to say how many incomplete tasks do you have open and how many of those are missing predecessors and or successors. The goal of this is you want 0% of your schedule to have missing predecessors and successors. Every task must have one, because again, it's just proving you do have logic in your schedule and there's nothing dangling out there and hanging out there with no relationship to anything in your project. So an example of this would be, say in your schedule, you have 441 tasks that are currently incomplete. Now this schedule could be greater than this, but that's how many incomplete tasks you have. And then 9 of those tasks are missing predecessors, 9 are missing successors, but 6 of those tasks have both predecessor and successor missing. So that means it's just a random stray task in your schedule with no relationship to anything. So you would add the amount of predecessors missing and the amount of tasks that have successors missing, but then you would minus the 6 that have predecessors and successors both missing. Then that comes up with 12 tasks total that are missing logic. So then you would divide that by the 441 tasks that you have open, and you have 2.72%. That's really not bad. But again, DCMA has a goal. You need to work towards getting it to where all your tasks have a predecessor and a successor. So we mentioned we're using the predecessor and successor fields to find this metric. So you're going to click on your predecessors and only select the blank ones. And when we pull this up, you can see that there should only be one task that does have no predecessor. And that's your very first task. In this situation, it is a project start date, but you don't have to have a project start. You could have anything that is the start of your project defined as a start, and that task is allowed to have 0 predecessors. In this case, I added details to a task and made it a summary, and so you can see that my links are still on that summary task, but the task here doesn't have a predecessor. I just need to verify that that is the case, that this is the predecessor, and change it to be that 5 and take away the predecessor in the summary column, because you do not want predecessors or successors on your summary task. They need to be on the detailed ones. So now that task does have a predecessor, and if I click on the blanks again, it's now fixed. There is only one task that has no predecessor. Now we're going to do the same thing for the successors. I'm going to filter on that column for only the blank fields. Once I press OK, it's going to pull up all the things that don't have a successor. This is where you are allowed to have one task that doesn't have a successor, and that should be your project completion. In this example, we do have a task that is called project complete, and it's a 0-day milestone, but it could be anything that is symbolizing what your last task of the project is, and that is allowed to have no successor. In this case, we have 2, and this is where I added detail to the footer section, but I have successors on my summary task, but not on these 2 new ones here. So I've got to go back and think about it. I could easily just say, yeah, it's linked to project completion, but that's not accurate. I need to go find out, okay, Yes, I have the curing for traffic, and that was what I was driving towards, but what is this complete cure? What is it linked to? So I've got to find out what that is and put a successor in there. If we wanted to say that framing couldn't start until that complete cure, then we would find where the framing task is, which is 34, and I would just type in 34 here. But then for this task, it needs to be completely cured before we do the concrete for the actual slab work, which is line 16. So I'm going to put a 16 here. We need to go back to the summary task that has predecessors and successors on it. Summary task can't have predecessors or successors. We need to move those to a detailed task underneath the summary. Task ID 21 is the plumber installing pipes in our block and fill foundation. We need the fill gravel to be complete before we can do that. So I'm going to move ID 21 off of this and move it to ID 15 as a successor. So I'm just going to type in a comma after 16 and type in 21. Now the other one that I erased from there was 28. ID 28 is the electrical installing conduit for any in-floor plugs or if you have an island. So it also needs the fill gravel to compete before it starts. So I'm going to move the ID 28 as a successor to ID 15 as well. Now I can filter on successors and find if any blanks. We should only find one, and it should be the final task. We are now compliant for this metric. To recap this metric, you want every task to have a relationship to another. This is what creates your network logic. Without logic, you don't have a tool that helps you make decisions.